Ladies and gentlemen, we're continuing. We should know overtime. I want to thank you for staying with us today. Chad, I want to continue the conversation about guns. We were talking about things as goes fast on these shows, as you can see, and quite often we'll have a conversation like we're having, and we need to add something to it. So in this overtime segment, I want to kind of cover a little more detail in that safety issue at home. And the reason I'm really want to focus on that is because of children getting their hands on guns that may injure them, and the security of that gun in the house. At the same time, accessibility to that gun in case you need it for defense.
I'm glad you said that. North Carolina has a general statute, 14315.1. It says storage of firearms to protect minors. And there's a series of things that you have to do if you should reasonably expect a minor to have access to that firearm in your home. My big thing has, for years, I've got 4 nephews, has been to put the gun on your person. It's really hard for someone to access that firearm if it's on your body without you being aware of it. Today, there's no such thing as a good hiding place for children. Children are more curious than we were as children. They're more capable. They're wiser than we were at their age. You might think the gun is hidden from the child. That child knows where that gun is. Mm-hmm. Get a gun safe if you can. One of those with the fingerprint reader, with the code that only you have access to. The last thing that anybody wants to do is let someone be injured as a result, or worse, be killed as a result of accessing that firearm that was not secure.
We have seen, and this is recent, just in the past few months, where people have intervened at malls. One of them, I think, was at the mall of somewhere in Pennsylvania, I believe. But the one I'm thinking about, the person that intervened was concealed carry. The guy was shooting in the mall. He literally intervened and took the person down. How would that be reacted to in North Carolina?
Well, we're going back to that other set of laws now that I told you about. We're going back to North Carolina common law. A private citizen's right to use lethal force against another citizen is governed by common law in North Carolina. They would be perfectly acceptable. That would be perfectly acceptable if that same circumstance happened in North Carolina instead of Pennsylvania. And as a side note, that young man at 22 years old did a pretty fair piece of shooting.
He really did. I was impressed. I don't know what kind of training he had.
I don't know either, but at a distance, I think the average was 40 yards to hit 8 out of 10 with a handgun, and the perpetrator had a rifle. Pretty good piece of shooting.
Absolutely, and pretty brave on his part.
Very brave on his part. A citizen in North Carolina can intervene on a third person's behalf, but only to the extent that the person being saved could have. What that means is this: if the intervener, the concealed carry citizen that intervenes, finds out that the person whose life they saved was an instigator, they can be looking at legal recourse.
Chad, I also see a lot of folks now nervous about events that they go to, and we're still on carry and conceal now. Events they go to, whether it's a ball game at a school, whether it's an event at a civic center, even churches now. I'm hearing of churches that are prepared. I mean, they got people in different places carry and conceal in houses of worship. Give us just your observation on what I just said. I mean, for a lot of folks, that's like shocking. I mean, should we be not only preparing, but creating a mental picture for the unthinkable? Because certainly we've seen the unthinkable happening.
Absolutely. It's sad, but it's 2022. I refer to the Sutherland Springs, Texas shooting, when that person walked in with a shotgun and gunned down 2 church members and were turning to gun down other church members, and that person who was on their security team produced their handgun and took them out of the picture and saved countless lives. Up close and personal, that shotgun with buckshot in it would have been devastating in that house of worship. And I get some pushback when I talk about this to, I guess you would call them elders and pastors, and they say, we're here to save souls. And I understand that. The good Lord gave us common sense for a reason. Today is not like it was, 30, 40, 50 years ago. People are much more often going into houses of worship and doing bad things like active shooters. We need people who can respond to that and know how to respond to it appropriately. I think we can find a reasonable balance between saving souls and also protecting our parishioners.
So when I look at it, I think about what we've done for years, and I recall looking back at public facilities where we've done not firearms, but fire drills where in case there's a fire. We've done tornado drills in schools where kids go in the hall and get on their knees and put their head on the floor or what have you. But my point is this, is that should we be doing active shooter drills regularly in public facilities where people gather, especially if it's like a school, a church, or something that people gather regularly? Should they be thinking about going through that process periodically just so folks out there will know what to do, because this is what we're planning to do?
Well, that's a little harder question for me because it's a double-edged sword.
It is.
On one hand, I would say absolutely folks should be prepared so that it requires no conscious thought. They know how to respond. The problem with that is a lot of times the active shooter is someone who went to that school recently and who is well versed on what's going to happen when that occurs, and they know which area to attack and which one to attack the fastest.
So you're basically supplying information to the person that's going to create the disaster, and that is hard.
Exactly.
That's hard. I think there's a kind of a closed circuit there that somehow that folks need to be assured that there is a team, 3 to 4 or whatever, that is looking at these things, and that they will take certain action. You know, they're there to look at that without going into detail.
I encourage every church that I have talked to, the elders, the pastors, even the lay person. I've taught some of the classes myself at some of the churches, and I encourage them to form their own security team, have it laid out so they know exactly what they're going to do when that occurs. Hopefully it will never occur, but I don't say if anymore, I say when, because we live in perilous times today.
When it comes to doing what you just said, speaking to churches or groups of people, is that something that given your time, that you would be readily available to speak to a group of people about what maybe they should think about, some of the issues they may confront, what their reaction should be, what their expectation might be versus what they actually are looking at?
Certainly. I do it on a regular basis. Some churches decide, yes, we're going to do this, and some say, no, we're not going to.
And I'm going to try to bring this to a close. I feel like we could sit here and chat for a long time, but I'm going to try to bring this to a close. The other observation is this. Give us your sense of where we are societally. There's just either one of two things seems to be happening. We're getting an overwhelming amount of information and detail on a lot of really unbelievable things that's happening in shootings, cuttings, you name it, whatever it is. I'll call it dangerous things that's happening to other human beings. Two questions. One is that real numbers that are ratcheting up in our society? Are we becoming a more violent, conflicted society? That's the first question. The second question in that compartment is, what are the kinds of things that we need to think about realistically as it relates to handguns? This idea that guns are killing a lot of people and we need to remove guns from our population. Speak to those two questions.
I can probably answer both of those at one time. To the argument and the people on the side of the aisle that say it's all the guns, it's all the guns. Well, guns as a whole haven't changed in over 100 years. The Stoner rifle, which is what the M4, the AR-15 is designed after, was designed in the 1950s. And it's the exact same operating system, the exact same rifle with a few cosmetic changes that it was back in the 1950s. People are the issue. It is not the implement, it is not the tool. The reason that I don't do hardly any social media, you touched on this. I have a YouTube channel and I have a LinkedIn page. When I started with LinkedIn, it was all professional networking.
Right.
Now, it's becoming just about as bad as any of the others now, but the reason I don't do any other social media is because social media is the devil. And I say that sort of tongue in cheek, but all kinds of misinformation is put out there on social media. I still believe today, even though there are more people in our nation than we've ever had, and there is a larger number per capita of evil in our nation and maybe insanity in the nation, I still think that overwhelmingly most of our citizens are good people. The problem is this: at my age, and I'm 54 years old, I have never seen a time in my life when our nation was as divided as it is right now, ideologically. And most of them on both sides of the aisle are good people, but one side doesn't want to listen to the other side and vice versa. It is not the firearm. It is not the good people that take a concealed carry class and carry concealed handguns that any of us need to be concerned about. It is not those people. When this became law in 1995, what did we hear, JW? You were here just like I was. We heard bloodshed in the streets. Back to the OK Corral days. Every traffic crash was going to be a gun battle. None of that has come to fruition. The people who jump through the hoops that our state sets forth and get their concealed carry permits are not the folks that we got to worry about. Those are the people who, hopefully, if something does occur that is beyond mention, that it's so tragic, that they would be able to respond a lot faster than like an off-duty officer or somebody who's on duty and is 5 minutes away.
As a firearms instructor, I've got to get this in, and I'm not I'm pushing the clock here really, but I want to get this in. I've had conversations with groups and others, and one question continues to kind of float to the top as it relates to violence. We're seeing more and more what appears to be more violence from our youth in towns, cities, and I'm talking like 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds. Even some folks that have been in business for years say it's unbelievable at youth violence. How do we deal with this youth violence? And the question is coming from people that's their job, judicially, to deal with youth violence. And I'm just kind of, blown away and thinking, wow, is it that bad? From a firearms instructor, and you talk to people all over the state, is youth violence out of hand now? And if that's the case, where's it coming from?
Well, youth violence is exponentially worse than it was even a few years ago. Some of it I can attest to, being a sworn officer for a number of years, is gang violence. They're recruited at an early age, and that violent street-type mentality foments more violence. The other, if the judges, if the psychiatrists, if the counselors can't answer that question, I certainly can't answer that question. I see it, but I don't know what the root cause is or what the best way is to handle it.
There seems to be some kind of social, psychological turbulence that's occurring, and we sit back and we see it. No one person can fix it. No big speech anywhere is going to change it. But at the end of the day, we just see that crumbling occurring. And it's kind of sad because it impacts families, it impacts communities, and we see a lot of crime.
I couldn't agree more.
I want to thank you for being with us today and invite you to come back, and also appreciate you taking a few extra minutes in this overtime segment to kind of talk about some of the issues and speak to some of those observations from your perspective. Again, it's always about perspective, and people that's seen it and been there and done it have pretty good perspective on what's going on.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We look forward to seeing you again next week, and as always, God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.